Greetings, everyone. I'm Dell with Healing Frequencies Music, and it's a very lovely Saturday afternoon after Thanksgiving. And I'm taking some time to do some blog posts. And lately, I've been adding a video to go along with that blog post to add just some personal touches to it. So, the title of this is The Frequency of Lying. And you think, what the heck is that? And as you can see, I'm a la casual in my sweatshirt and sitting in front of a nice warm fire. And hopefully I won't have a cat jump on me in the middle of this, but if I do, oh well. Anyway, the frequency of lying. What is it? Well, first of all, is lying a frequency? Well, think about it. Everything has an energy behind it. And if there's going to be an outcome to something, so if you say a lie, or you tell an untruth, or you say a truth, or whatever you say, eventually there's going to be an action that follows what is being said. So if you're saying something that's negative, there's going to be a negative outcome. If you're saying something that's positive, there's going to be a positive outcome. So that alone tells you that there's energy and that there's a frequency to lying. Well, what is lying? We have people say, well, it's not telling the truth. Well, what it may be a truth to one might not be a truth to another. So it boils down to lying is really fear-based. It is one of those ingredients, for lack of a better term, because every recipe has a group of ingredients. And one of the ingredients in lying is fear. But at the same point, fear has lying as an ingredient. So, but lying can sometimes be white lies, half truths, because there are times we will tell somebody something, but there's just a little tiny twist in it to make it feel like it's a little better. Anyone who hasn't done that, raise your hand. Notice my hand isn't going up. So I'm admitting. Now, one of the first things I learned as a teacher, and I said this to my woodwind tech class and my elementary music methods class many times, kids know it when you're not telling the truth. They can spot BS from a mile away. Somehow they have tapped into the energy that you are putting out. They don't care what's coming out of your mouth. They're going to care more about what's coming out of your heart, and they're going to tap into that. And I saw it. My first 3 years of teaching, those students knew I was fearful. They ate my lunch. It wasn't until I learned the love and logic approach to teaching where I had to understand, why are they exhibiting a specific behavior? Then you figure out how to respond based on what the desire of that behavior is. For example, and I've used this example in other videos. The kindergartner walks up to me one day and grabs my pants and said, Miss H, so-and-so stuck their tongue out at me. And I went, oh, was it black? And the kid goes, no. I said, well, then you have nothing to worry about. Because I knew that kid was wanting attention. So I gave him the attention he wanted, but it wasn't negative attention. So if you look at lying, a lot of times lying and telling tall fibs and stories that are laced with partial truths are all meant for getting attention. But fear is a whole nother thing, because fear is a form of control. And the other thing I learned as a teacher is, if you don't own up to your mistakes, kids are just going to continue eating your lunch. So I learned to do this in college as a college professor as well as a public school teacher. When I make a mistake, kids were always going to point out your mistakes. I'm like, oh, wow, you caught the mistake that Miss H made. Good for you. That means you're paying attention. Thanks for letting me know. And then they got the attention they wanted. I didn't make a big deal out of it. I didn't come after them for pointing it out. I admitted my mistakes. And I learned that the more I did that, the more respect that the students had for me. And I remember one time, I was teaching at Moscow Charter School in Moscow, Idaho, which is where I'm from. We were at the Hartung Theater rehearsing our end of the year musical. And I had 150 kids sitting out in the theater, with the classroom teachers there. And I had a student teacher with me. And I'm standing up there on stage talking to these kids. And she goes, how in the heck can you get the attention of 150 kids and make them listen to you? I said, practice, my dear, practice. But at the same point, I had learned the art of teaching with love and logic. I learned the art of honoring them even when they were behaving badly. When a child did something really goofy, I'd say, okay, you continue doing that. You realize there are going to be consequences and you get to pick your consequences. And they'd look at me. And of course, kids, they want to try you. And until one day I told the kid, well, I told you, this was your third shot. And so you have two choices. And I gave him the two choices. Do I have to? And the kid started crying. It was a fifth grader. I'm like, well, didn't you hear me say that if you did this again? Yeah, but I didn't think you were actually going to do it. And I had to follow through with the circumstance that the kid had chosen. That kid never misbehaved again. And in my article of is lying, the frequency of lying, I talk about the most recent election in the United States, because there were some rather fascinating things that went on. And I say at the end, it felt like I was watching a soap opera because you never knew what was going to happen. And it was as much entertaining as it was anything else. But the sad part to me was what happened when it was all over. Watching people have meltdowns. I really felt sorry for them because they had heard a specific thing spewed at them so much. They had bought into everything, and I call it propaganda because that's what it was. I'm going to call it, might as well call a spade, right? Propaganda is taking whatever belief you have and speaking it over and over and over and over, and using as many methods of getting that out as possible. The interesting thing is people weren't buying it as much this year as they had in previous years. And I thought, that's interesting. And I think it's because the news media specifically covered up a few things and people knew it. But then the news media would say, well, wait a minute. One day they would speak one way about somebody, and the very next day they would completely flip-flop their ideas. And you're like, okay, which is it? Is it this one or is it this one? Which do I believe? Do I believe the left hand or do I believe the right hand? And, I think that they forget that we have eyes and that we have ears. We all have brains. We should know how to use our brains by now, but that's not necessarily always what happens. And, I watched all of this with fascination, because I'm not a political person at all. I did vote, but I never tell anybody how I voted. But one of the things that I did differently than a lot of people is I paid attention to both sides. I watched news. I watched all of the major outlets. Some of it made me want to scream, but I did listen to it because I had to understand that perspective. If I can't understand the opposing side or whatever perspective it is, because there's two views. As I say in the article, there's a yin and yang. There has to be balance. In order for you to find balance, you have to see both sides of a coin. I mean, when you pull a coin out of your pocket, you're going to have heads or tails. And at any given day, you're going to see one side. But if you always saw the head side and didn't know there was a tails, you wouldn't know the full scope of that coin. It's no different with political parties. If you don't pay attention to what the opposing party has to say, you're not going to have the full picture. Even if that party is saying things that you really disagree with, and you're like, I don't like that. But at the same time, that is what helps us find the balance and make good decisions, because we were given a brain for a reason. But I also say you look for clues. And I talk about it in the article. Out of the abundance of our heart, our mouth speaks. And what's in our heart is what's ingrained into our subconscious. We are going to act out what we have practiced. We are going to say the things that we are practicing. So a lot of the rhetoric that we heard spewed by mostly the media and some within the various campaigns, you knew that it was just people, blah, blah, I call it verbal vomiting, for lack of a better word. And then you had to follow the actions of those people once they said those words. Did their words and actions line up? People speak of joy. Okay, if they're speaking of joy, are they also speaking of other things? Are they speaking of joy and then spewing nastiness at the same time? If they're doing that, then there's a disconnect. So you look at the actions of people. And here's the one thing. I know one of the candidates people really didn't like because the style, we have expectations of what we think a presidential candidate should act like. There should be a certain amount of diplomacy. There should be all of these things. But again, those are ideas of what we personally feel. But we also forget that every government and leader of a country has to deal with the entire world. And trust me, there's no way that every country in the entire world feels like the United States. They're going to have a different set of ideas, paradigms, ways that they run things, and and many of them are completely opposite of what the United States is. So you need a leader who has the ability to look at all sides and see how to bring, some balance into the ecosystem of how we function in the world. And the last thing I'm going to say here is there's a lot of people right now that are extremely unhappy, that are extremely fearful because they were told that democracy would end as we know it. When we succumb to those thoughts and we marinate on those thoughts and we wallow and they become a part of us, eventually it settles into your physical body and it will make you sick. We are so addicted to fear that it drives us. And I explain how that works in the article. So I encourage everyone that is watching this video, if you know someone who is of the opposing political party from you, call them up, have a conversation. If they're really sad and unhappy with the outcome, just love on them, hug them, say, I don't care how you voted. I still care for you. You're a person. We have different beliefs. Let's just get together and go do something fun that has nothing to do with politics or whatever. This includes family. I was extremely disheartened when some news media outlets are saying, well, don't go hang out with your family over Thanksgiving if they voted for a certain candidate. And I'm like, why would anyone in the news media say that? To me, that is divisive. If you want to unite America, then we have to reach out. We can't participate in the frequency of lying or the frequency of fear or the frequency of rejection or the frequency of anxiety or the frequency of depression. We can't align with any of those frequencies if we want to be healthy. And it starts with our mental health. And if we're constantly feeding this fill in the blank into our brains, then we're not going to be happy people. And there are some people who could really use a hug right now, who could use someone to reach out to them and just let them know it's going to be okay. You may not like the candidate that won. You may not like the person personally at all, but you have to look at what happens and then speak into it, speak out into the atmosphere what it is you desire. I desire unity, and I hope this president does that, finds a way to unify the country. It starts with us, though. And as I say in other blog posts, it takes one word at a time for us to change the world. So I say one word at a time and one hug at a time. Go give someone some love who needs a little extra right now. Thank you. We'll see you in the next video.